Welcome, everyone, to this New York Financial Writers Association event with Dr. Henry Kaufman. It's going to be a great one, and I want to thank Dr. Kaufman for participating. This is in conjunction with the launch of his new book with David Cecilia called The Day the Markets Roared, How a 1982 Forecast Sparked a Global Bull Market. And here's a copy. Backwards, I guess, to you guys. Now, I can see that from the looks of most of the people on the call, you're of an age that you actually remember the Dr. Kaufman from his Salomon Brothers days. But to go back a few years now, although as we know, he's continued to be active in financial markets ever since. But even though many of us do know who he is, I'm going to give a little introduction, and I'm just going to read it from the About the Author section of his new book. And Henry Kaufman is president of Henry Kaufman and Company, Incorporated, a firm established in April 1988, specializing in economic and financial consulting, and now a family investment office. For the previous 26 years, he was with Salomon Brothers, where he was a senior partner, managing director, member of the executive committee, and head of the firm's 4 research departments. He was also a vice chairman of the parent company, Salomon Inc. Before joining Salomon Brothers, Dr. Kaufman was in commercial banking and served as an economist with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Born in Germany in 1927, Kaufman received a BA in economics from New York University in 1948, an MS in finance from Columbia University in 1949, and a PhD in banking and finance from the New York University Graduate School of Business Administration in 1958. He also received an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from New York University in 1982 and honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Yeshiva University in 1986 and from Trinity College in 2005. Over his long distinguished Wall Street career, Dr. Kaufman has met with central bankers and other leaders in business and government around the world and delivered scores of addresses at prominent organizations in finance, economics, and business. He's the author of hundreds of essays and editorials in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Fortune Magazine, Businessweek, and other leading periodicals, as well as 4 previous books. I'm not going to name all of them right now. And I'm also going to skip over some of his affiliations with charitable groups, but Dr. Kaufman lives in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, and Palm Beach, Florida, with his wife Elaine. They have 3 sons, Craig, Daniel, and Glenn. And with that as an introduction, I would like to welcome Dr. Kaufman to this New York Financial Writers Association event.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. And I want to dive right in and ask you to tell us what your book is about.
Well, my book is about a call that I made on August 17th, 1982, where I changed my view on the market from having been bearish for more than a decade to a bullish view that monetary policy would ease, that interest rates would continue to decline and decline rather sharply. And that, of course, set off a dramatic rally in the bond market and in the stock market on August 17th, 1982. My book describes the events leading up to 1982, why I was so bearish, and goes a little bit beyond that and talks about some of the current problems.
Very good. I just want to read the first paragraph of the memo that you wrote, and it was addressed to portfolio managers. And this is what it said. Just the first paragraph of a decently long memo. Recent events in the economy and financial markets necessitate a fresh look at the prospects for U.S. interest rates. These events suggest that the present decline in interest rates will continue, although irregularly, with perhaps some dramatic interruptions. The decline in interest rates and the length of time such a decline will take will largely be determined by both the extent to which the U.S. credit structure has been impaired and the level of interest rates that will rejuvenate sustained economic activity. In this context, conventional cyclical benchmarks are no guide. On balance, some interest rate benchmark for the next 12 months are as follows. Long-term U.S. government bonds now yielding 12.75% will fall into the 9% to 10% range. The federal funds rate now at 10% will decline to a low of 6% to 7%. Those numbers are so high that they sound foreign to the ears of people who are hearing about negative interest rates and sovereign debt in some countries now. But that paragraph, especially those last sentences where you actually gave numbers, really did shake the market. Can you tell us why?
Well, I believe it was due to several developments. I had been bearish on the markets for a long time, throughout the 1970s and going into very early 1981. And my views were well known and widely distributed. Every time I made a speech, my speeches were distributed widely. And every time I had a market view, I put it in writing. So it was for nearly a decade that I more or less had a negative view on the market. As I said, my views were known through weekly comments on credit, which I contributed to, and through various speeches, which I gave. And they were written speeches and very often distributed to our clients.
So you're just saying that, how is it though that you gained such an audience? What did you do that made you so closely watched?
Well, as you may recall, I joined Salomon Brothers in 1962, and my first boss was Sidney Homer, and Sidney Homer had just finished writing a book called A History of Interest Rates from 2000 BC to the present time. Now, I'll tell you an anecdote. After I was at Salomon Brothers for a week or two, all of a sudden, Sidney Homer came into my office and he said, "I got a galley, the galleys of my book here." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I have two galleys. I want you to take one and your secretary the other. And I want you to read it out loud to your secretary." So I read 580 pages out loud to my secretary, including voluminous statistical tables on interest rates from 2000 BC to then to the 1960s. And that was a significant introduction to interest rates for me, way beyond the details that I had learned at the Federal Reserve, where I'd been the prior 5 years.
Well, you must have gotten a little hoarse doing that.
Well, yes, and of course, as you know, Peter, subsequently after I joined Salomon Brothers, we created a weekly comments on credit, where I stated my views on the front page, and then there were vignettes about the markets in the following 3 pages. Also, once a year, we presented a prospect for the financial markets, which was a detailed statistical analysis based on the flow of funds, and which was distributed usually in January to a very large audience that we had invited to the Waldorf Astoria, and there were hookups also to Australia and to Europe. So my background was pretty well known.
Yeah. You know, one thing I want to do on this call is focus on something that's of great interest to this audience, which is a lot of people, most of the people on this call are journalists. And so we're particularly interested in your relationship with the press over the years. I see that one of the people on the call is Myron Kandel. And I looked through, in your book, you have a long list of all the reporters who called you on August 17th or immediately after to get an interview with you. And it's a list of luminaries of financial journalism, people like Bob Lenzner, Matt Winkler, who went on to found my employer, Bloomberg, Steve Rosenfeld from the Associated Press, who I used to work with, and on, people from all over the world, really, print and broadcast. And I don't know. Britt, can you unmute Myron Kandel? I wonder if he has something to say about his dealings with you over the years.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Henry was a guru of interest rates. A little sidebar, Henry. I don't know if I ever told you this, but my classmate at Columbia Journalism was Sidney Homer's daughter.
Oh, I
So
didn't know that.
I felt that I knew you even then. But the point is that everybody should know, and particularly the younger people on this Zoom, that Henry was known for his integrity. He called it the way he saw them. And there was no question that there was any influence on him from his firm or associates or senior partners or anybody else. So you knew if you could talk to Henry Kaufman, you got it straight. And it was a pleasure to deal with him. And it's so good to see you, Henry. You look great.
Well, thank you. I should add an anecdote to that. As you know from the introduction of the book, I had written this memorandum, and it was on August 17th, 1982. But I didn't go to the office that day. I went to the Waldorf Astoria because we had an executive committee meeting at Salomon Brothers at the Waldorf to get away from the furor of the trading room. And I arrived there at about 7:45, and I gave my driver a copy of my comment about my change in the markets. And about a half an hour later, we got a call at the Waldorf. It was my secretary, and I took the call, and she read to me what I had said. I made a few corrections, and I said, okay, send it out to the press and everybody at the same time. And I finally came back, and John Goodfriend, who was then the managing partner, said, you know, you kept us sitting here 15 minutes. What was that all about? And I said, well, I just wrote a memorandum in which I expressed my current views on the market. And he said, what was that? And I said, well, I thought interest rates would go down quite a bit from here on for a variety of reasons. Then a couple of other partners jumped in. You said that? Why didn't you say that at yesterday's meeting where we had all the salesmen there? Well, did you speak to any traders before or any clients before? I got a grilling by my own partners. I said, no, I didn't. And so we started the meeting. Half an hour later, the telephone rang. John Goodfriend took it, and he said, okay, thank you. The markets were up. Well, another 15 minutes later, we got another call, and he said, the answer was the markets are up again. And John asked, what's this all about? And the other end said, but it's Henry's memo. And with that, we adjourned the meeting at the Waldorf and went down to Salomon Brothers.
Why didn't you let people within Salomon know more about the memo before you released it?
No. When you run a research effort, you have to do it with a lot of objectivity in it, because you cannot disclose your views to a trader or to a salesman, to somebody in-house. You're going to lose your objectivity and you're going to lose your reputation. Protecting the integrity of research is very important. If you don't, people find out about it and they won't listen to you anymore.
Okay. You know, I want to read a short passage from the book, and then we have a special treat. Along with critics of my forecasts, reasonable and otherwise, my growing influence often attracted satire. Comedy can be a wonderful outlet for expressing such anxieties, but also for simply poking some fun at celebrities. This was hardly surprising, and indeed I enjoyed the parodies. Here, after all, was a rather short in stature, balding, middle-aged economist who lived an unostentatious lifestyle compared with many similarly compensated Wall Streeters. Poring over reams of dry data, I figured out, through a process mysterious to most and so seemingly magical, which way the winds of economic change were likely to blow. These were great elements for parody. The New York Financial Writers Association made my unwitting fame as an economist the theme of their 1982 production of the Financial Follies called How Lovely to Be Famous. I was played by a McGraw-Hill editor named Robert Cosma, who dressed as Merlin the Magician. And now Jane Riley is smiling there. She remembers those days. Terry, Tom, Len, Claudia, a lot of the people on this call were in that show. It was a few years before I joined the Follies. But here's the special thing. Here's the special treat. Britt Tunick, former president of the organization, who's now our executive director, dug up a recording of that song. And we're going to play the last little bit of it. Here's the program.
Unfortunately, there's no video for this point in time, so this is what we have.
You'll hear the audio.
I'll have you know, I'm the very model of a modern day economist.
Hey, Britt, can you start it from 407?
Critics know my grasp of every shibboleth. What really thrills me most of all is scaring people half to death.
And make it louder.
On television with expressions of their poverty, and then to watch the market slide. Complete insolvency. And when the Times comes out next day reporting on the fiscal fall, see like headlines say, this Kaufman who has caused it all. How lovely to be famous and to have one's rivals all eclipsed, and make 10 million smackers for predicting the apocalypse. Absolutely sure that I get full publicity. Back in that marketing and presentations ominous, you can bet your apple software that I'll never be anonymous.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, yeah. Applause. And the book, what you wrote in the book is that as American Banker accurately reported the night of the performance, the member of the audience most convulsed with laughter was Henry Kaufman.
Right. It was.
That's great. It's great. And it was nice of you to come to our show, by the way.
Great to be here.
So can you talk to us a little bit about your relations with the news media and how that fit in? How was that part of your job?
Well, since I gave quite a few speeches, I tried many times, most of the time, to put, when I spoke before a large audience, my speeches into writing. And we wrote a press release on those speeches, and a copy of the speech was attached so that the media got what I was going to say all at the same time. There was no preference for any one reporter. It was a significant distribution to everyone at the same time. And that helped a lot. I tried, if I gave an informal talk, it was for a dinner group or a breakfast group, but if it was for a larger group, I wrote it out because I wanted to remember what I said. I could be misquoted, but I still know what I said. And I think that served me well, and I think it served the media well at the time. As you know, I also wrote every week at least the front page of the Comments on Credit, and we published annually Prospects for the Financial Markets, which was widely distributed, and there were no favorites, so to speak. Everybody got it. at the same time. And it's true, on the day that I made that call, August 17, 1982, there was a big problem the next day because how we're going to handle the media. And we decided for the time being not to allow the media, for me to interview with the media. Who was going to be first? Who was going to be second? Who was going to be third? And we delayed this for a number of days until there was kind of a semblance of order. And as you know, from the book itself, there's a listing of all the media people that called in, the frequency that they called it. We kept very close record of that. And there were no favorites, so to speak.
Mhm.
And that always served me well.
Right. No favor. You mentioned Bergen Record, could be the local newspaper called in. That's fine. They're journalists too.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
So I see Bob Kapash has his hand up. Do you want to go ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question about the distribution, Henry. Since there was no electronic distribution then, I don't remember how you distributed to everybody at the same time.
No, there was I'm trying to remember the system that we had to get it out to everybody. Well, first of all, there are the Associated Press, a lot of these organizations that had mass distributions got everything at the same time. And we tried to get it to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal at the same time as we got it to a local newspaper, if we could.
Was that done by messenger?
But sometimes by messengers. And we even tried to get what I said to Europe. So that the message was sent to a London office made distributions. And there was never a charge made against me or this firm that we were front running this with somebody on the outside. And indeed, the events of that day were investigated by the New York Stock Exchange, because there was a concern in the market that I gave this information out to our trading desk before it was distributed to everyone else. And they came in, they looked at our records and everything else, and the charge was incorrect. It is true that Salomon Brothers that day made a lot of money, but that was on the basis of Salomon Brothers responding to my forecast, but not Salomon Brothers getting advance information of my forecast.
Okay.
Well, I can, if I can make one more comment, and then I'll be quiet the rest of the time. I was at Salomon Brothers at the time and had an office on the same floor as Henry and the trading floor. And you could hear the roar across the building into our offices because so much activity was taking place on the trading floor. I had never heard anything like that before. So it really, it was a very exciting day.
Bob, thank you very much for sharing. That's a fantastic anecdote. It really adds a lot. Appreciate it. We have a small enough group that if other people want to raise their hand and jump in with a question, we can do it and take you selectively off mute. I'm going to jump in with something. I see Dr. Kaufman, are you down at NYU Stern right now? Is that where you are tuned in from?
No, right now where I am located,
Yes.
where my domicile, I'm in Palm Beach, Florida right now.
Okay, but you're using a background of NYU Stern.
I am? My goodness, I didn't know that.
That's what we see.
I
It
didn't know
looks
how
like
that
you're.
got there. That's interesting.
You didn't know that.
No, I
Okay.
didn't know that.
You have been a generous benefactor of NYU. Is that correct?
Well, NYU has been very near and dear to me. Maybe I should expand that a little bit. I went to NYU undergraduate school. I went to Columbia for a master's, and then I went to NYU Business School for my PhD. But I became a student of a very famous professor at that time by the name of Marcus Nadler. And Marcus Nadler was very influential in steering my career. For example, I was at that time, before I joined the Fed, I was with Manufacturers Hanover in a branch. And I applied, I was working towards my doctorate, and I applied cold to the Federal Reserve for a job. But I recommended Marcus Nadler, my professor, as a reference. And lo and behold, I got an interview at the Federal Reserve Bank. And I think it was in response to my referring to Marcus Nadler, who was known to the people at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, that I got the interview, and ultimately I got the job. Marcus Nadler never told me that, but he became really my academic mentor for many, many years. Now, what do I mean by that? Anytime I had a problem or something that bothered me, I went to see Marcus Nadler. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I was at the Fed, and I was called up by one of the officers, and they said it was either Lebanon or Iraq or Iran, I forgot. They need somebody to advise them how to develop a money market. You've been in banking, you've been here on the money market side at the Fed. Would you like to go over there? And it seemed rather romantic. My wife and I had just got married. We'd go to the Middle East, and for 2 years, I would be there. Well, I went to see my academic mentor, Marcus Nadler, and he said, look, why do you want to spend 2 years there? You're going to be coming back after 2 years to the Fed, and now you're going to be an expert on the money market in Iraq. Who do you think wants an expert on Iraq? And you are going to be, the group that was with you at your level 2 years ago will be advanced. And I turned it down because of that advice. And I tell you one or two other anecdotes. I had an offer when I was at the Fed to go to a prominent Wall Street firm. So I went to see Marcus Nadler, and I said, I've got this offer, and they're offering me a big salary increase, want me to go to Europe. And he said, it's a very interesting offer, but I will tell you one thing, you will never, ever be a partner in that firm. And I understood. I was Jewish.
Uh-huh.
And I turned down the job.
Wow.
Now, then I had an offer from Salomon Brothers, and I won't tell you how I got into that, but actually also through Marcus Nadler, one of the senior partners at Salomon Brothers was very friendly with Marcus Nadler for a lot of reasons. And I went to see Marcus Nadler, and he said, I know why you're here. And I said, why? He said, you got an offer from Salomon Brothers. And I asked, well, what do you think of it? And he said, well, if you join Salomon Brothers, you will quickly find out whether you're going to sink or swim. And secondly, at Salomon Brothers, you will hear the cash register ring every minute of the day. And that's how I took the job.
You know, actually, you dedicated the book to William Billy Salomon.
Yes.
Can you tell us why?
Well, Bill Salomon was an unusual leader. He had his great capacity was to attract young people. And he had a very good feel for, I came there, who was I? At the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and one of the senior partners at Salomon Brothers brought me in to see Billy. And I'll tell you an anecdote. When they made me an offer, I was offered something like $13,000 to start in January 1962. And I said to Bill Salomon, make me the offer. I said, I think I want to get $1,000 more. And Bill Salomon said to me, Henry, take it or leave it. And the best decision I made was to take it. But Bill Salomon was an unusual leader. He was not what you would call a trader in bonds or in stocks, but he knew how to select the right management people and move them along.
Okay.
And he was able to build a consensus, but he also used his authority when things went the wrong way. And he pushed down very hard. You could never, under Bill Salomon, do something that would hurt the integrity of the firm. Now, I'll tell you an anecdote since we're into anecdotes here. I was on the executive committee at one time, and we were sitting there meeting, and a young man came in and gave Bill Salomon, who was managing the firm at the time, and we did a $200 million bond trade in the 1970s with a major institution. It was a big trade, 200 million. And he asked the young man, what did we take out of the trade? Because we didn't take it as a broker, we took it in as a dealer. So there wasn't a brokerage fee, there was a charge for taking the risk. And the young man said, well, I think it was 1.5% or something like that. And he said, we took out that much? He said, bring in the partner, ask the partner at the desk to come in. He was a relatively young man. He came in and he said, what did you take out? And he said, 1.5 or whatever. He said, and Bill Salomon said, you know, we don't do that to a client like that who gives us a $200 million trade. You give him back to what he's entitled to. And then Billy said, and so that you remember this, we're going to reduce your participation in the profits of the firm this year. Now, that never happened in Wall Street today anymore. But that's what Wall Street was like at one time.
That's amazing. You had a much less productive relationship with John Gutfreund. Can you tell us about that?
Well, John Gutfreund became the managing partner after Bill Salomon stepped down. And I was on the executive committee and at the time, and I think John resented that I was the image to some extent of Salomon Brothers, and that he was not the equivalent, even though he outranked me as managing partner. And he resented that for a long time. We didn't confront each other except one time. And it's in the book. And we had at Salomon Brothers a Monday morning sales meeting. Bob Coprash will remember that. And at that meeting, the trading desk, the sales desk spoke, and I spoke. And after one of those meetings, when I finished speaking about the market ahead and what the Fed was about to do, John made a snide remark about me. And he had done that a couple of times. And so I stood up, I was standing already, and I recited a verse from Alexander Pope about criticism to everybody. There was an uproar in that big sales trading room, people sitting there, two senior partners, tussling with each other. And afterwards, Bill Salomon called me and said, what happened this morning? And I said, well, you just tell John to lay off and it won't happen again. And John never did it again. John had a bully instinct in him, and he bullied as long as he could get away with it. Anyway,
anybody who can quote Alexander Pope automatically wins the argument.
What?
Anybody who can quote Alexander Pope from memory automatically wins the
Yeah,
argument.
be sure yourself in your own reach to know how far your learnings and teaching go. But be discreet and know there's something or other. I forgot the details of it.
Nice, nice. You know, speaking of your education, tell us about growing up in Germany and then emigrating to the United States and moving to Washington Heights and so on.
Well, I was 10 years old when I came to the United States. I was born in a very small town in Germany, in Hessen, a town called Wenings. And on January 31, 1937, there was a torchlight parade. The Nazis broke into our house, tore everything apart downstairs. My father fled. And the next day we moved to Frankfurt. And fortunately, my grandfather had two sisters well established in the United States. They gave us visas and we came to the United States in December 1937. And I will only tell you one little tidbit. My mother took me to PS 23 in the Bronx to school. The principal wanted to see how much English I knew, but after he got through with the fingers and the arms and the nose, that was it. And so I was the oldest child, 10 years old, in the first grade at PS 23. Well, I stayed there a little while and then gradually just caught up to my grade.
Wow. And then you went to George Washington High School, is that correct?
Yes, I went to George Washington High School, and I was preceded there by Henry Kissinger and Alan Greenspan, both of whom were brought up in Washington Heights, and Harry Belafonte also went there, and one or two others. And from then I went to New York University at University Heights. As you know, NYU was at Washington Square, but at University Heights, that pre-med, pre-law, pre-dental, and engineering. Now, you may ask, but you didn't pursue any of those. And it's true. And I changed my mind very quickly. I was very ambitious to get through my undergraduate work. And I started right away in June after I graduated college. And I did go through undergraduate school in 2.5 years. But that summer, I took an intensive course in analytical chemistry, quantitative chemistry. And to my chagrin, I was in the laboratory trying to find out what the substance was the unknown substance, what the chemical content was. And my professor was standing next to me, asking me how I was doing. And as I was talking to him, the chemical in that tube shut out and hit him right across the chest. And that more or less was the beginning of my changing my mind about pursuing the hard sciences. And I studied economics. And one of the early books that I read was Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom, which made an impression on me, although my own economic feelings are not that much to the extreme right.
Right. But you talk in the book about how you were one of the first, if not the first, PhD economists working on Wall Street. Can you talk about why it was that had not happened before, what changed, and what you brought as an economist to Wall Street?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I suspect I was the first PhD in a Wall Street firm. And that in itself was rather strange because not every partner at Salomon Brothers had a university education. But the man under whom I was brought in, Sidney Homer, was well educated. The only one, I think, of all the partners who had a Harvard education. And he was writing this book on the history of interest rates and so on. And he told me he was starting a fixed income research effort. And I have to tell you, there wasn't any fixed income research effort on Wall Street. They published statistical tables on what interest rates were on different obligations. But when I heard that, I realized that I was going to be in on a groundbreaking effort. And that really encouraged me to go to Salomon Brothers. And it is to the credit of these hard-nosed partners, and particularly to Bill Salomon and another partner called Charlie Simon, who brought me in, that they hired Sidney Homer, who had just finished writing a history of interest rate, was academically inclined, and all of the trading partners had no inclination in that area. And they always thought I was an academic for a while at Salomon Brothers. Why? Because I had a doctorate degree. But I had worked a number of years in an industrial bank. I had worked a number of years in a commercial bank, and I had worked a number of years at the Federal Reserve Bank. But to them, I was still an academic for a while.
Which is, today, it's widely accepted that you want to have some academics on staff as well as some more commercially oriented people.
Well, that is true. And I found that very early. When I finally had charge of all of research, I went out to look for PhDs. They didn't have to be PhDs in banking and finance, but there were PhDs in an exact science. At least they had the mathematics by which to deal with the new math in finance. And many of them turned out to be very, very good analysts. And the PhD was cheaper to hire than an MBA.
Great story. I just want to encourage anyone on the call who has would like to ask a question, put your hand up. Hey, Greg Miles, there you go, Greg, your turn.
Go ahead. Hi, Peter. Thank you. Henry, I wanted to ask you, we were talking about the way you distributed information to the media during your era. What do you think of the way the Wall Street firms, how they distribute research to the media now, and also how the management manages the media, which is two separate functions?
Well, I think there are certain regulations today which firms have to adhere to in the distribution of information. That was not so in my day. There's some restrictions how research people interact with salespeople, trading people, and so on, even though I question the extent to which that is adhered to. It is, think of an analyst following an industry. What is his relationship to the trading desk about the results he's finding and the analysis he's doing on a company, on an industry? Who gets the first look at that? Does everybody get it, or does the trading desk get it first? There are all kinds of dialogues that go on at times, and that's very hard to regulate. I would say, if you want to maintain the sanctity of research, then the head of research ought to be a member of the senior management. That I had that capacity. I became a member of the senior management of the firm, and if anything came up about research, it had from anywhere, it had to go through me, and it came up in the executive committee. I was there to defend research. Who is there to defend research today? Very often, the research function is attached to sales or trading, a senior partner involved in that, and there isn't that buffer. And it's very important for a researcher to understand that there is somebody who will be there to represent him at the highest level of management. And if not, then the thing gets bent a little bit out of shape after a while. And I remember, I'll give you an incident. We had a very fine banking analyst. And when Walter Wriston stepped down and he announced the new head of Citi, the bank stock research analyst was called, and he said, "I'm waking and I'm quaking. It's the worst mistake they ever made." Can you imagine? It appeared in the New York Times. And well, that day we had an executive committee meeting, and they looked at me and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And they said, you know that we've been trying to become a senior manager for that bank, and now look what this has happened. I said, "Look, I'm not going to fire him, but I'm going to talk to him and all the other researchers as to how they should word their response when they get a call from the press. You don't say, 'I'm waking and I'm quaking and I'm shivering,' and that was the end of it. But I was in the senior management, and if I had not been in the senior management, the chances are that he would be fired."
Okay. Tom Merriam has his hand up. Tom, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Kaufman. It's sort of a two-part question. One, when you wrote that memo back in 1982, did you ever imagine the markets flying upward the way they have for now 4 decades? And part B, what would you write today if you were to do a similar memo?
Well,
Good questions.
I did not know what the response would be. No, I had no idea, because I've written other memorandums about interest rates. But I think the reason that response occurred that way, because for a long, long time, I've been bearish. And my bearish views were widely known and widely followed. And now I changed my mind. Would that occur today? I don't know whether there is anyone who has built a reputation over a longer period of time who's widely known. Research has become much more institutionalized today, and you don't have individuals coming to the fore that receive a significant following. So I don't think it can occur very quickly again, that somebody will stand up who's been bearish or been bullish or what for an extended period of time, widely recognized as such, that had some influence and then changed his view. So I think that's unlikely to happen soon. The institutionalization of research and activities negates that.
And Tom's second question is, what would you be writing today?
What would I be writing today?
Right, about the markets.
I would say the problem going forward is one in which I think the Federal Reserve has lost some of its independence and has become linked to the US government or the US Treasury, as I say, linked at the hip. And I think to some extent, the Fed's independence has diminished. And that is not good. And I think that's even more so because the Secretary of the Treasury, as you know, was a former head of the Federal Reserve. So you have the Secretary of the Treasury, former head of the Reserve, and also Secretary of the Treasury, who dialogues with the current chairman of the Federal Reserve. There is less equality there than there used to be. And that bothers me some.
We're going to try to wrap at 8, which is 7 minutes from now. So if you have a question, get it in now. Okay, Leonard Sloan has a question. 1 second, we'll get you off mute. Britt, can you make sure Len's off mute?
Len, you have to unmute yourself. I can't do
Oh,
it.
Len, you have to do it yourself. Okay. There you go.
Am I off mute now?
Yes.
Henry, I was just going to ask how you felt about in the period in the past when some people would refer to you and Al Wolgenauer as Dr. Doom and Dr. Gloom.
Well, that's a true comment. And Al Weigelauer and I have been friends since we were at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York together. It's a long time. That's the 1950s. And periodically we see each other. Of course, with the pandemic, we talk occasionally on the telephone. And we have shared views on the market from time to time. He coming through his views somewhat more through the economics that prevail, and my views coming through more through the direction of financial flows. As you may know, I have a chapter in my book just on Al Weigelauer. I consider Al Weigelauer an extraordinary fine economist. In fact, I think I say in the book, I think he's an economist's economist. And we coincided at times because I came through it on the financial side, Al came through more on the economic side.
I'm going to ask, this might be the last question, or maybe we'll have more for another afterward, but so you were born in 1927, which makes you either 92 or 93 now, right?
That is right.
Very impressive. What keeps you going?
Oh, well, at 93, you have to be thankful for reasonably good health. What keeps me going after that is curiosity. There are still things to be read, things to learn, developments occurring in the business world and the financial world that are interesting, not analogous to the past, but maybe different from the past. There's always the question, how are these things different today from what occurred years ago? We tend to look at things through a cyclical eyes, overlays. Well, overlays are dangerous because you don't see what's different. And what's different is very difficult to perceive. As I say in the book, it is like standing in the middle of a block and trying to say what's coming around the corner. And that has its analytical problems. But that's what creates the excitement. And it is, I really wish I were the age of all of you here, because the times ahead are going to be just as interesting as they were in the last 40, 50 years, and perhaps even more so. There's so many changes in the process. I very often feel that the progress made in the real world, in the technological world, and even in the business world, are far greater than the progress we're making in economics, in the study of economics.
Fascinating. So, do you believe that your long years of experience enable you to see things that might be missed by some newly minted economist or strategist?
Well, maybe yes and maybe no. I have to be careful that I don't conclude that here we go again. Everything is analogous to something in the past. The question always has to be, what is analogous, but what's different from the past? And we take great comfort from making cyclical overlays. Well, yes, there's comfort because what we tend to say is what happened in the past will happen in the future, but that isn't always so. It is the question of what's different the next time around. That is the issue in analysis.
Fascinating. Okay, I see Tom has his hand up. Is that still you, Tom, or is that from before?
That was from before, sorry.
Okay. If anybody has one last thing to say, squeeze it in. We got about a minute left. Go back to Myron Kandel. Take yourself off mute, Myron.
Henry, got me?
Yep.
Got you.
Henry, how long do we have to wait till the next book?
Now, I've written 5 books now, and unless something extraordinary occurs over the next year, this may very well be the last book. Now, I said that after I wrote the 4th book. And I'll tell you how the 5th book here came along. It's in the introduction of the book. My secretary came into my office and said, "It's time to clean up." And she put on the table a whole bunch of albums of newspaper clippings, press interviews. Each one had 1 year. And there was one for 1982 where August 1982 had one big album all by itself. And that's how I came on the idea of writing this book, The Day the Markets Roared. That one big album with all the news clippings and everything else. So I have no aspirations right now to write another book. Well, you've been a writer, and many of you are writers. Writing is a lonely business. You're by yourself, and you have to deal with your own thoughts. Can you imagine? You can't listen to anybody, and so on. And that is very disturbing, that you have to listen to yourself and what you want to do and how you want to do it. It's very lonely. When I used to write speeches, most of them I did at home years ago when I was at Salomon Brothers. And I used to get up and rate the icebox when I got nervous. I never found it that easy to sit down and write. But I also never spoke to a large audience without putting my views right onto a piece of paper and read my speech. Yeah. So it's writing is a wonderful discipline. It's a discipline because you're all by yourself. Yeah. You don't write as a group. You write something just there all by yourself with a pen and pencil or your word processor right in front of you. And it's an interesting experience. And you can once you get going, it's all right. But the idea of getting going for me at times was a problem.
I think a lot of us on the call can agree with that 100%. And I think it's actually a great way to end. We want to finish on time. So I want to thank everyone for being on the call. But most of all, I want to thank Dr. Kaufman for sharing your time with us. And a reminder, this is the book, The Day the Markets Roared, How a 1982 Forecast Sparked a Global Bull Market. Thank you very much to everyone, and good night.